In a world where royal emotions are carefully guarded behind palace walls and practiced smiles, sometimes the most powerful moments happen when those walls come down. What unfolds when duty calls a prince away from his family, and the cameras capture something the world was never meant to see? This is the story of a goodbye that revealed the human hearts beating beneath the crowns, a moment so raw and authentic that it reminded an entire nation that love knows no titles, and even royalty must face the pain of separation. The tears that fell that day weren't just drops of water. They were windows into souls that carry the weight of a kingdom while trying to hold together a family. This is the true story of Kate and William's most vulnerable moment, when their private goodbye became a public testimony to the power of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that tie us all together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at the tall windows of their private apartment. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass while she watched the early morning joggers make their way through Hyde Park. The familiar routine of London awakening should have brought her comfort, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of goodbye. In the bedroom behind her, William was methodically packing his military-issued duffel bag. Each item he folded and placed inside seemed to echo in the unusual silence that had settled over their home. His movements were precise, practiced from years of similar departures, yet Catherine could sense the reluctance in every gesture. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his inner turmoil over their years together. The way his jaw tightened when he was trying to maintain composure, the slight pause before he placed each item in the bag, as if he could somehow slow down time itself. Their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were still asleep in their rooms down the hallway. The decision to let them sleep in had been William's, though Catherine wondered if it was more for their benefit or his own. Saying goodbye to Catherine was difficult enough. Explaining to their young children why Daddy had to leave again for an extended deployment would test even his considerable emotional strength. The assignment had come through official channels 3 weeks earlier. A humanitarian mission in a conflict zone that required someone with William's specific military background and diplomatic standing. The mission was expected to last 6 months, possibly longer depending on the developing situation. 6 months without bedtime stories, without weekend football matches in the garden, without the daily rhythms that had become the foundation of their family life. Catherine turned from the window and watched her husband. At 41, William still carried himself with the military bearing that had been instilled in him during his service years. His broad shoulders seemed to carry not just his own burdens, but the expectations of an entire nation. Yet in this moment, in the privacy of their bedroom, she could see past the future king to the man she had fallen in love with at university. The man who still reached for her hand during scary movies, who left little notes in her coat pockets when he traveled, who could make her laugh until her sides hurt with his surprisingly good impressions of other world leaders. "The car will be here in an hour," William said without looking up from his packing. His voice carried the professional tone he used during official engagements, but Catherine caught the slight tremor underneath. She had become an expert at reading between the lines of his carefully controlled exterior. Catherine moved to the bed and sat on the edge, her hand resting on a stack of letters she had written for him to take. One for each week they would be apart, sealed and numbered so he would have something from her to open when the loneliness became too much. It had been her idea, born from her own experience of their previous separations when his royal duties had taken him away. The letters contained everything from silly observations about their daily life to profound expressions of love, from updates about the children's activities to intimate thoughts she could never speak aloud in the formal settings where they spent so much of their public life. "I've included the photos from Louis's first day at school," she said, gesturing to the envelope on top of the stack. "And the video of Charlotte's piano recital. She's been practicing that piece for weeks, just so you could hear it when you returned." William's hands stilled on the shirt he was folding. Catherine saw his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath before he turned to face her. His blue eyes, which could command attention in any room, now held a vulnerability that he showed to no one else in the world. The weight of his responsibilities, the constant pressure of public scrutiny, the delicate balance between duty to country and devotion to family, it all resided in that look. "Katie," he said, using the private nickname that belonged only to their most intimate moments. "I need you to know that if there was any other way." She stood and moved to him, placing her hands on his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I know," she whispered. "I've always known." It's who you are, William. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. You've never been able to ignore a call for help, whether it's from your grandmother, your country, or people suffering halfway around the world. The early morning light filtering through their bedroom windows cast a golden glow around them as they stood together. Outside, London was beginning its daily rhythm, but inside their private world, time seemed suspended. These were the moments Catherine treasured most, when the cameras were off, when the formal protocols were set aside, when they could simply be a husband and wife facing life's challenges together. William's deployment would take him to a region where communication would be limited and dangerous. There would be weeks when she wouldn't know if he was safe, when she would scan news reports for any mention of incidents in his area. She had lived through these fears before during his earlier military service, but they hadn't dulled with time or experience. If anything, having children had made the fear sharper, more immediate. The children will ask questions, Catherine said, voicing one of her primary concerns. George especially. He's old enough now to understand that Daddy's job is different from other fathers, but not old enough to fully comprehend why that means you have to leave. I've written them letters too, William admitted, nodding toward a separate, smaller stack on the dresser. One for each month I'll be away. I thought you could decide when to give them, based on how they're handling things. Catherine felt her heart swell with love for this man who thought of everyone else's needs, even while preparing for his own difficult journey. The letters for the children would be filled with encouragement, with reminders of how proud he was of them, with promises of the adventures they would have when he returned. She knew William well enough to know that he had probably written and rewritten each one, searching for the perfect words to comfort and inspire their young children during his absence. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Little Louis, their youngest at 5 years old, appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep and his favorite stuffed animal tucked under his arm. His eyes, so like his father's, took in the scene before him with the intuitive understanding that children possess. "Are you leaving today, Daddy?" Louis asked, his small voice cutting through the careful composure that both his parents had been maintaining. William knelt down to his son's level, opening his arms. Louis ran to him, burying his face against his father's shoulder with the complete trust that children have in their parents' ability to make everything right. Catherine watched as William closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of his youngest child, memorizing this moment to carry with him during the long months ahead. "Yes, buddy, I am," William said gently. "But remember what we talked about? Daddy has a very important job to help people who need it very much. And while I'm gone, you're the man of the house. You have to help Mummy and be the best big brother to George and Charlotte." Louis pulled back to look at his father's face, his small hands framing William's cheeks with innocent affection. "Will you call me every day?" "I'll try my very best," William promised. "And Mummy will read you the letters I wrote, and you can write letters back to me. It will be like we're having conversations, just with words on paper instead of our voices." The simplicity of the explanation seemed to satisfy Louis, who nodded solemnly before hugging his father again. Catherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, watching this tender moment between father and son. These were the images she would hold on to during the difficult days ahead. The love, the connection, the unshakable bond that distance could never truly break. Soon, the sounds of George and Charlotte waking up drifted down the hallway. At 10 and 8 respectively, they had already experienced their father's deployments, but Catherine knew that didn't make the goodbyes any easier. If anything, they were old enough now to truly understand what his absence would mean for their daily lives. George appeared first, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, followed closely by Charlotte, who had somehow managed to sleep in her school uniform from the previous day. Both children assessed the situation with the pragmatic understanding of royal children who had learned early that their lives would always be shaped by duty and service. "How long this time?" George asked, settling onto the bed next to his mother. His question was matter of fact, but Catherine could hear the underlying emotion that he was working hard to control. At 10, George was already beginning to understand the weight of his own future responsibilities, the path that would one day lead him to the same choices his father was making now. 6 months, possibly a bit longer, William answered honestly. He had always believed in treating his children with respect, giving them truth appropriate to their ages rather than empty reassurances. Charlotte climbed onto the bed as well, curling up against Catherine's side. "Will you miss my birthday?" she asked, her voice small. William moved to sit beside his family on the bed, gathering all of them into his arms. Your birthday is in May, sweetheart. I should be home well before then. And even if I'm not, we'll celebrate together the moment I return. I promise. They sat together in a family huddle, the five of them creating their own private world in the midst of the public life that constantly demanded their attention. Catherine felt the weight of the moment, knowing that these quiet, intimate times were what sustained them all through the challenges of royal duty. The sound of cars arriving in the courtyard below broke through their peaceful bubble. William's security detail and transportation had arrived, signaling that their private time was officially over. The transition from family man to deployed serviceman was about to begin, with all the formal protocols and public scrutiny that accompanied any royal departure. I need to finish getting ready, William said reluctantly, kissing each of his children on the top of their heads. Why don't you three help Mummy make breakfast? I'll be down in a few minutes. The children filed out of the room, understanding instinctively that their parents needed a few final moments alone. Catherine remained on the bed, watching as William completed his preparations with renewed efficiency. The personal moment had passed. Now he was shifting into the professional mode that would carry him through the difficult goodbye and the mission ahead. Catherine stood and moved to the window again, watching as official vehicles arranged themselves in the courtyard below. Security personnel moved with practiced precision, checking protocols and establishing the departure routine. Soon, photographers would arrive, alerted by palace communications about the departure. The private goodbye she and William had shared would give way to the public moment that would be captured and shared with the world. The irony wasn't lost on her that their most personal moments often became public property. The nation that William served so faithfully also demanded to witness his sacrifices, to see the human cost of his dedication. Today's departure would be photographed, analyzed, and interpreted by millions of people who had never met them but felt connected to their story nonetheless. William finished packing and closed the duffel bag with a decisive zip. The sound seemed to echo in the room with finality. When he turned to face Catherine, she saw that he had completed the emotional transition she had witnessed so many times before. The vulnerable husband and father was still there, but now he wore the mantle of duty that would sustain him through the challenges ahead. Ready? He asked, though they both knew the question was more about emotional preparation than physical readiness. Catherine nodded, moving to his side. Together, they would go downstairs to share breakfast with their children, creating one last memory of normalcy before the formal goodbye began. She would smile and maintain composure, playing her role as the supportive wife who understood the necessity of his service. But, inside, she was already counting the days until his return, already planning the celebration that would mark the end of their separation. As they reached for each other's hands and headed toward the door, Catherine caught their reflection in the mirror across the room. They looked like what they were, two people deeply in love, facing a difficult separation with grace and dignity. But, beneath the composed exterior, she knew they were both holding on to this moment, storing up the love and connection that would have to sustain them through the months ahead. The royal goodbye was still to come, but Catherine already felt the ache of missing him beginning to settle in her chest. Soon, the world would witness their public farewell, but this private moment, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, would be the memory she treasured most. The dining room at Kensington Palace felt different that morning, charged with the unspoken knowledge that this would be their last family breakfast for many months. Catherine had instructed the household staff to prepare all of William's favorite foods: fresh scones with clotted cream, perfectly cooked eggs Benedict, and the strong English breakfast tea that he preferred above all others. It was a small gesture, but one that came from her desire to fill these final hours with comfort and love. George sat across from his father, methodically cutting his pancakes into precise squares, a habit he had developed when nervous. Charlotte chattered about her upcoming school play, trying to fill the silence with normal conversation, while Louis focused intently on arranging his fruit into patterns on his plate. Each child was processing the impending separation in their own way, and Catherine's heart ached watching them struggle with emotions too complex for their young minds to fully understand. William ate steadily, engaging with each child's conversation while simultaneously checking his phone for final briefing updates. The ability to compartmentalize, to function normally while managing multiple stresses, was a skill he had honed through years of royal duty, but Catherine could see the effort it required today. Every few minutes, his gaze would linger on one of their faces, as if he were trying to memorize each expression, each gesture, each moment of this ordinary yet precious morning. "Daddy," Will you be able to video call us like last time? Charlotte asked, looking up from her half-eaten toast. Her question carried the hope of a child who had learned to adapt to her father's absences but still needed reassurance about maintaining their connection. The communications might be more limited this time, sweetheart, William explained gently. But I'll send messages whenever I can, and Mummy will read you the letters I wrote. Plus, you can write to me, and I'll get your letters when supply shipments arrive. The mention of limited communications sent a chill through Catherine, though she kept her expression neutral. Previous deployments had allowed for regular video calls, text messages, and email contact. This mission, however, would take William to a region where security concerns made such communications dangerous and potentially impossible. They might go weeks without any contact, leaving Catherine to manage not just her own fears, but also the children's questions about why Daddy couldn't call. I want to give you something, Daddy, Louis announced suddenly, sliding down from his chair and running toward the family room. He returned moments later clutching a drawing he had made the previous evening when Catherine thought he was asleep. The paper showed their family stick figures standing in front of a house, with a bright yellow sun smiling down at them. At the bottom, in his careful 5-year-old handwriting, he had written, "Come home soon." William accepted the drawing with the solemnity of receiving an important state document. His hands trembled slightly as he examined every detail. The way Louis had drawn him in his military uniform, how he had made Catherine's hair extra long because she was always the beautiful mummy, and how he had positioned all 5 family members with their arms outstretched toward each other. "This is the most important thing I'll carry with me," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "When things get difficult, I'll look at this and remember that I have the most wonderful family waiting for me at home." He carefully folded the drawing and placed it in the chest pocket of his uniform, the same pocket where he kept his identification tags. Louis beamed with pride, not fully understanding the magnitude of the gift he had given his father, but pleased by the obvious importance William placed on it. Catherine watched this exchange with a mixture of love and heartbreak. These were the moments that made royal life both beautiful and unbearably difficult. The juxtaposition of innocent family love against the harsh realities of duty and service. She knew that William would indeed carry that drawing close to his heart through whatever dangers lay ahead, and that thought provided both comfort and added worry about what he might face. The quiet family moment was interrupted by a gentle knock on the dining room door. Private Secretary James Henderson entered with the respectful demeanor that marked all interactions with the royal family during personal time. "Your Royal Highness, the departure convoy is ready, and the press has been positioned at the approved locations." William nodded, understanding that this was his 5-minute warning. The transition from private family time to public royal duty was about to begin, with all the accompanying formalities and media coverage. Soon, their personal goodbye would become a public moment, witnessed and documented for the world to see. "Children," Catherine said gently, "let's finish up breakfast so we can go outside with Daddy." The next few minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. William went upstairs one last time to collect his gear and complete his transformation into the military officer who would represent Britain on this humanitarian mission. When he returned, he was wearing his dress uniform, every detail perfect and precise, from his polished boots to the ceremonial elements that marked his rank and heritage. Catherine had also changed, selecting a navy blue coat dress that photographed well and conveyed the appropriate tone of dignity and support. She had learned over the years that her clothing choices during significant royal moments would be analyzed and interpreted, and she wanted her appearance to send a clear message about her pride in William's service and her confidence in his mission. The family gathered in the main hallway, where their official photographer waited to capture some formal family portraits before the public departure. These photos would be released to the media as part of the official departure coverage, but they also served as personal keepsakes for the family. Catherine knew that having professional photos from this moment would be precious to all of them, especially if the mission extended longer than expected. "One more family photo," Catherine suggested, gathering the children around William. They arranged themselves naturally, with George and Charlotte flanking their father while Louis claimed his favorite spot directly in front. Catherine stood beside William, her hand resting lightly on George's shoulder, creating the picture of a united family facing a temporary separation with courage and grace. The photographer worked quickly and professionally, capturing both posed portraits and candid moments. Catherine appreciated his sensitivity to the situation, the way he managed to document this important moment without making it feel intrusive or overly formal. These photos would become part of their family history, marking a significant moment in their lives together. As they prepared to move outside for the public departure, William pulled Catherine aside for one final private moment. They stood in the alcove near the main entrance, just out of sight of the waiting press, but still close enough to hear the growing crowd of media and well-wishers who had gathered to witness the departure. "Take care of yourself while I'm gone," William said, his hands framing her face in the gesture that had become their private signal of deep love and connection. "Not just the children, not just your royal duties, but yourself. I need to know that you're taking care of your own heart, too." Catherine leaned into his touch, savoring the warmth of his hands against her skin. "I promise," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something, too. Come home safely. Whatever happens out there, whatever the mission requires, you come home to us." "I promise," William replied, sealing the vow with a gentle kiss that lasted long enough to sustain them both through the months of separation ahead. The sound of approaching footsteps indicated that their private time had officially ended. The children appeared around the corner, followed by security personnel and staff members who would coordinate the public departure ceremony. Catherine straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath, preparing to step back into her public role as the supportive royal spouse. Outside, the scene was controlled but impressive. The main courtyard of Kensington Palace had been arranged to accommodate the departure ceremony, with designated positions for photographers, television cameras, and the small group of invited guests who would witness William's departure. Security personnel maintained clear sight lines while palace staff ensured that every detail of the event proceeded according to protocol. The morning air was crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight casting long shadows across the courtyard. Catherine could see her breath in small puffs as they emerged from the palace, and she instinctively moved closer to the children to ensure they stayed warm during the outdoor ceremony. The photographers immediately began capturing images, the sound of camera shutters creating a constant background rhythm to the proceedings. William's military colleagues were waiting beside the convoy vehicles, standing at attention in their dress uniforms. These were men and women who had served alongside him in previous assignments, people who understood both the importance of this mission and the personal sacrifice it represented for his family. Their presence provided a reminder that William was not facing this deployment alone, that he would be surrounded by capable and dedicated colleagues throughout the mission. Catherine recognized several faces in the group. Colonel Matthews, who had served with William during his helicopter pilot training, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, who had become a trusted friend during their previous joint assignments, and Major David Thompson, whose wife Catherine had grown close to during their husband's last deployment. These relationships, forged through shared service and mutual support, formed a network of understanding and care that extended to the families as well as the service members themselves. The formal departure ceremony began with William receiving his final briefing documents from the mission commander. As Catherine watched him accept the sealed orders and operational details, she was struck again by the magnitude of responsibility he was accepting. This wasn't just a symbolic role or ceremonial duty. William would be actively involved in coordinating humanitarian relief efforts in a dangerous region, making decisions that could affect the lives of countless people. George stood beside Catherine, his young face serious as he watched his father's professional interactions. At 10, he was beginning to understand that his future would likely include similar moments, similar choices between family comfort and public service. Catherine could see him studying every detail of the ceremony, unconsciously preparing himself for the responsibilities that awaited him. Charlotte had positioned herself where she could maintain visual contact with her father throughout the proceedings, while Louis held tightly to Catherine's hand, his small fingers gripping hers with the intensity that came from not fully understanding what was happening but knowing it was important and sad. The official ceremony concluded with William inspecting the convoy vehicles and receiving final security briefings from his protection officers. As these professional obligations were fulfilled, Catherine felt the growing weight of the approaching moment when he would actually leave. The formal protocols had provided a buffer, a series of predictable steps that delayed the emotional reality of his departure. But now that buffer was nearly exhausted. William returned to where his family waited, his expression composed but his eyes revealing the depth of emotion he was working to control. The public nature of this goodbye meant that their most intimate words would have to wait, that their deepest feelings would need to be conveyed through looks and gestures rather than spoken aloud. Be good for Mummy, he said to the children, kneeling down to bring himself to their eye level. Remember that I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and think of me every time you see the moon, because I'll be looking at the same moon and thinking of you. The simplicity and beauty of his words brought tears to Catherine's eyes, though she blinked them back, determined to maintain composure for the cameras and, more importantly, for their children. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure, the actual goodbye that would separate them from months of uncertainty and worry. George stepped forward first, embracing his father with the serious dignity that seemed to come naturally to him. Even at 10, he understood the gravity of the moment and the need to be strong for his younger siblings. Take care of yourself, Dad, he said, using the more informal address that marked their private family moments. Charlotte was next, throwing her arms around William's neck with the uninhibited affection that characterized her approach to life. I'll practice piano extra hard so I can play you lots of new songs when you come home, she promised, her words slightly muffled against his shoulder. Louis required no encouragement, launching himself into his father's arms with complete trust and love. William held him tightly, breathing in the scent of his youngest child's hair and whispering words of comfort and encouragement that only Louis could hear. Then, it was Catherine's turn, and suddenly, they were standing face to face in front of the cameras and the watching crowd, preparing to say goodbye to each other in the most public possible way. But, in that moment, despite the dozens of people surrounding them, despite the clicking cameras and rolling video, they might as well have been alone in the world. The moment Catherine had been dreading finally arrived as William stepped toward her, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that blocked out everything else around them. In the space of a heartbeat, the formal ceremony, the watching cameras, and the gathered crowd all seemed to fade into the background. What remained was simply a husband and wife, facing a separation that neither wanted but both understood was necessary. Catherine could feel her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack as William reached for her hands. His touch was warm and familiar, an anchor of comfort in the swirling emotions of the moment. She could see her own feelings reflected in his eyes: love, worry, pride, and an underlying sadness that came from knowing how much they would miss of each other's daily lives during his absence. "I'll write to you every day," William said softly, his voice carrying just far enough for her to hear, but not loud enough for the microphones positioned around them to pick up his words. "Even when I can't send the letters immediately, I'll write them. When I get home, you'll have a complete record of every day we were apart." Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to respond. The gesture was so typically William, thoughtful, romantic, and practical all at the same time. She could picture him in some temporary shelter or military base, writing by lamplight after exhausting days of humanitarian work, pouring his thoughts and feelings onto paper that would eventually make its way back to her. "Take care of our babies," William continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "And remember that what you do here, holding our family together while I'm gone, is just as important as anything I'll accomplish on this mission. You're my strength, Kate. You always have been." The use of her simple name, rather than the formal address that public events typically required, was like a direct line to Catherine's heart. In that moment, she wasn't the Princess of Wales or a member of the royal family. She was simply Kate, the young woman who had fallen in love with a prince who happened to also be the most honorable man she had ever known. "Come back to me," she whispered, the words carrying all the love and fear and hope that she couldn't express more fully in such a public setting. "Come back to us whole and safe, because we need you. I need you." William lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture that managed to be both intimate and appropriate for the cameras recording their every movement. The simple act carried more emotional weight than any elaborate display could have achieved, and Catherine felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes despite her determination to remain composed. Around them, the carefully orchestrated departure ceremony continued according to protocol, but Catherine was only dimly aware of the activity. Her world had narrowed to include only William's face, his hands holding hers, and the precious final moments they had together before duty would tear them apart. The sound of engines starting in the convoy vehicles provided an audible countdown to their separation. Catherine could feel the children moving closer to her, instinctively seeking comfort as they witnessed their parents' emotional goodbye. She was acutely aware that this moment would be preserved forever in photographs and video footage, that their private pain was becoming part of the public record, but she found that she didn't care about the exposure. Some moments were too important to waste on worrying about appearances. William released her hands and stepped back slightly, his military training taking over as he prepared to transition from husband and father to deployed service member. Catherine could see the shift happening, the way he drew himself up to his full height, and let his professional demeanor settle over his features like armor. It was a transformation she had witnessed many times before, but it never failed to amaze her how completely he could compartmentalize when duty required it. "Your Royal Highness, it's time," Colonel Matthews said quietly, approaching with a respectful but firm tone that indicated the departure schedule could not be delayed any longer. William nodded, then turned back to his family for one final moment. He placed a hand on George's shoulder, squeezed Charlotte's fingers, and kissed the top of Louis's head before returning to Catherine for their official goodbye. What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world and analyzed in newspapers and magazines for weeks to come. As William pulled Catherine into a formal embrace, appropriate for their public roles, but still conveying the depth of their connection, something shifted in Catherine's carefully controlled emotions. Perhaps it was the reality of watching him actually leave, or the knowledge that this might be their last physical contact for many months, or simply the overwhelming combination of love and fear that had been building throughout the morning. Whatever the cause, Catherine felt her composure finally break. The tears she had been holding back throughout the entire departure ceremony suddenly escaped, flowing freely down her cheeks as she clung to her husband. It wasn't a dramatic sobbing or hysterical display, but rather the quiet, dignified expression of profound emotion that somehow made it even more powerful. William's own control wavered as he felt Catherine's tears against his cheek. His arms tightened around her, pulling her closer as if he could somehow absorb her pain and carry it with him. For a moment that lasted both an eternity and no time at all, they simply held each other, two people in love facing an unwanted separation with as much grace and dignity as they could manage. The photographers captured every second of the exchange, but rather than feeling intrusive, their presence seemed to lend weight and significance to the moment. This wasn't just a private family saying goodbye. This was the nation's future king sacrificing time with his own family to serve others, and his wife supporting that sacrifice even as it broke her heart. When they finally separated, both Catherine and William had tears visible on their faces. Rather than diminishing their dignity or making them appear weak, the display of genuine emotion seemed to elevate them somehow, revealing the human hearts that beat beneath the royal titles and reminding everyone watching that love and sacrifice were not limited by station or circumstance. Catherine stepped back, allowing William to complete his transition to his professional role while she turned her attention to comforting their children, who had been deeply affected by witnessing their parents' emotional goodbye. George had wrapped an arm around Charlotte's shoulders, while Louis pressed himself against Catherine's side, his small body trembling slightly from the intensity of emotions he couldn't fully understand. "It's okay," Catherine whispered to them, gathering all three children closer to her. "Daddy has to go do his important work, but he'll come back to us. He always comes back to us." The words were as much for her own comfort as for the children's, a reminder of the promise that had sustained them through previous separations. William had never failed to return from his deployments, had never let his commitment to his family take second place to his duty to country, despite the demands and dangers of his service. William moved through the final departure protocols with renewed efficiency, understanding that prolonging the goodbye would only make it harder for everyone involved. He shook hands with palace staff members, received final good wishes from colleagues, and completed the security briefings that would govern his movement from the palace to the airport. As he approached his vehicle for the final time, William turned back to look at his family one more time. Catherine lifted her hand in a small wave, managing to smile through her tears, while the children pressed closer to her sides. It was a picture of courage and love, of a family that understood the cost of service but was willing to pay it nonetheless. "I love you," William called out, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. The simple declaration, spoken in front of the cameras and microphones, was both a private message to his family and a public testimony to the values that guided his life. "We love you too," Catherine called back, her voice stronger now as she found her footing in this new reality. "Be safe. Be strong." Come home to us. William climbed into the lead vehicle of the convoy, and, within moments, the procession was moving toward the palace gates. Catherine stood with her children, watching until the last vehicle disappeared from view, taking with it the most important person in their world. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gradual dispersal of the media and staff members who had witnessed the departure. Catherine remained in the courtyard with her children, none of them quite ready to return to the palace and begin adjusting to the new rhythm of life without William. Is Daddy really gone? Louis asked, his small voice uncertain as he processed what he had just witnessed. For now, Catherine replied honestly. But he'll be back before you know it. And, in the meantime, we have each other, and we have all the love Daddy left with us to keep us warm until he returns. Charlotte reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook that Catherine hadn't noticed before. I'm going to write him a letter every day, too, she announced with the determination that characterized her approach to most challenges. So when he comes back, he'll know everything that happened while he was away. George nodded approvingly at his sister's plan. That's a good idea. And we can take lots of pictures for him, too, so he doesn't miss anything important. Catherine felt a surge of pride in her children's resilience and creativity. Even in their sadness, they were already finding ways to maintain their connection to their father and cope with his absence. Their strength gave her strength, reminding her that she wasn't facing this challenge alone. As they finally turned to walk back into the palace, Catherine caught sight of herself in one of the large windows that faced the courtyard. Her tears had dried, leaving only a slight redness around her eyes as evidence of the emotional goodbye. Her posture was straight and confident, her hand steady as she guided her children. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had just said goodbye to the love of her life and was already finding the strength to carry on without him. The image surprised her with its power. She had worried about how she would handle this moment, whether she would be strong enough to support her children while managing her own fears and sadness. But, looking at her reflection, she saw not weakness or vulnerability, but rather the quiet strength that had carried royal women through centuries of similar challenges. Inside the palace, life would continue according to the routines and responsibilities that defined their daily existence. There would be official duties to fulfill, children to care for, and the countless small decisions that made up the texture of family life. But everything would be different now, colored by William's absence and the constant awareness of the distance that separated them. Catherine paused in the entrance hall, looking around at the familiar surroundings that would be home for just the four of them for the next several months. The palace felt larger somehow, emptier despite being filled with the same furniture and artwork that had always been there. But it also felt more precious, a sanctuary where she and the children could process their feelings and support each other through the difficult days ahead. The public departure was complete, but the private journey of separation was just beginning. Catherine knew that the images of their tearful goodbye would be circulating around the world within hours, analyzed and interpreted by people who had never experienced the unique challenges of royal life. But she also knew that those same images would serve as a testament to the reality of their love and the authenticity of their commitment to both family and service. As she helped the children out of their coats and prepared to begin their first day without William, Catherine felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness for their separation, pride in his dedication to important work, fear for his safety, and hope for his successful return all competed for space in her heart. But underlying all of these feelings was a steady confidence in the strength of their love and their family's ability to weather this temporary separation. The goodbye was over, but their love story would continue, sustained by letters and memories and the unshakable faith that this separation, like all the others before it, would eventually lead to a joyful reunion. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Kensington Palace, casting familiar patterns on the floor that Catherine had seen thousands of times before. But today, those patterns seemed different somehow, highlighting the emptiness that William's departure had left behind. The children had returned to their normal activities. George was working on homework in the study. Charlotte was practicing piano in the music room, and Louis was building elaborate castles with his blocks in the nursery. But Catherine could sense the undercurrent of sadness that ran through all their actions. She found herself wandering through the rooms of their private apartment, touching objects that carried William's presence. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter from that morning's breakfast, unwashed because she couldn't quite bring herself to erase that final evidence of his domestic life with them. His favorite sweater draped over the back of his reading chair in their bedroom, still holding the faint scent of his cologne. These small remnants of his daily presence felt both comforting and heartbreaking. The phone calls had started almost immediately after the convoy disappeared from view. Other royal family members checking in, palace staff confirming schedule adjustments, friends offering support and understanding. Catherine had handled each conversation with practiced grace, accepting condolences as if William had died rather than simply deployed, understanding that for many people, the royal family's sacrifices were both fascinating and incomprehensible. But it was the call from William's mother, now Queen Camilla, that had nearly undone Catherine's carefully maintained composure. "I know exactly how you're feeling, darling," Camilla had said, her voice warm with understanding. "I've stood in that courtyard myself, watching Charles leave for dangerous places, wondering if I was strong enough to hold everything together until he returned. You are stronger than you know, and your children are lucky to have you." The conversation had reminded Catherine that she wasn't the first royal spouse to face this particular challenge, that there was a long tradition of women who had maintained households and raised children while their husbands served crown and country in distant places. The knowledge provided some comfort, but it also highlighted the unique isolation that came with royal life. Few people could truly understand the specific combination of public scrutiny, private worry, and institutional responsibility that defined her current situation. As evening approached, Catherine gathered the children for dinner in the smaller family dining room rather than the formal space they had used that morning. The intimate setting felt more appropriate for their reduced family circle, and she wanted to establish new routines that would help them all adjust to William's absence. She had learned from previous deployments that maintaining structure and creating new traditions could help ease the transition. "I've been thinking," Catherine said as they settled around the table, "that we should start a family project while Daddy is away. Something special that we can share with him when he returns." "Like what?" Charlotte asked, her interest piqued despite the lingering sadness from the morning's goodbye. "Well, we could create a family journal, taking turns writing entries about what we do each day. We could include photos, drawings, and maybe even pressed flowers from our walks. By the time Daddy comes home, we'll have a complete record of our time together." George looked up from his meal, considering the proposal with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "We could organize it by months, and maybe create special sections for important events like birthdays and holidays. And I could draw pictures," Louis added enthusiastically, his 5-year-old mind immediately grasping the creative possibilities of the project. Catherine felt a warm surge of affection for her children's resilience. Even in their sadness, they were able to embrace new ideas and find ways to stay connected to their father. The journal project would give them a constructive way to process their feelings while creating something beautiful that would strengthen their family bonds. After dinner, they settled into the family room for their evening routine. Catherine had always treasured this time of day, when the formal demands of royal life gave way to simple family activities. Without William there to help with bedtime stories and tucked-in hugs, the routine felt unbalanced, but she was determined to maintain the comforting predictability that helped the children feel secure. She chose to read from a book of adventure stories, thinking that tales of brave heroes on distant journeys might help the children process their father's deployment in a positive way. As she read about explorers facing challenges with courage and determination, she could see the children drawing connections between the fictional characters and their real-life father. "Daddy is like the explorer in the story," Louis observed during a pause in the reading. "He's gone to help people in faraway places, just like the hero who went to save the village." "That's exactly right," Catherine agreed, marveling at her youngest child's ability to find meaning and comfort in the parallel. "And, just like in the story, our hero will come home safely when his important work is finished." As bedtime approached, Catherine faced one of the challenges she had been dreading most, tucking the children into bed without William there to share the responsibility. He had always been an essential part of the bedtime routine, telling jokes to make them laugh, checking for monsters under the bed, and providing the strong, reassuring presence that helped them settle peacefully into sleep. She started with Louis, whose room was decorated with pictures of airplanes and trains, reflecting his fascination with vehicles of all kinds. As she helped him into his pajamas and brushed his teeth, he chattered about his day, but she could sense his growing awareness that something fundamental was different about this bedtime. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Lewis asked as she tucked the covers around him. It wasn't an unusual request, but tonight it carried extra weight, reflecting his need for additional comfort and security. Of course, sweetheart, Catherine replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. Would you like me to sing the lullaby that Daddy taught you? Lewis nodded eagerly, and Catherine began the gentle melody that William had learned from his own father. The song was simple but beautiful, passed down through generations of royal children as a connection to family history and tradition. As she sang, she could almost feel William's presence in the room, his voice harmonizing with hers as it had so many nights before. Charlotte's bedtime routine was more elaborate, involving the careful arrangement of stuffed animals, the selection of tomorrow's outfit, and a detailed review of the next day's schedule. At 8, she was developing her own sense of independence and responsibility, but she still needed the comfort and security that came from her parents' attention and care. Mummy, will you be sad while Daddy is gone? Charlotte asked as Catherine braided her hair for sleep. The question was direct and honest, reflecting Charlotte's growing maturity and her natural empathy for others' feelings. Catherine considered her response carefully, wanting to be truthful while still providing appropriate reassurance. I will miss Daddy very much, Catherine answered honestly. Sometimes I might feel sad about that, and that's okay. But I'll also feel proud of the important work he's doing, and excited about all the things we'll do together while he's away. And most of all, I'll feel grateful that I have you and George and Lewis to love and take care of. Charlotte nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to most adult conversations. I'll help you not be too sad, she promised. We can do extra fun things together. That sounds like a wonderful plan, Catherine replied, touched by her daughter's thoughtfulness and generosity. George, at 10, required a different approach to bedtime comfort. He was old enough to understand the complexities of his father's deployment, including the potential dangers and the importance of the mission, but still young enough to need reassurance and emotional support. Catherine found him reading in bed, a habit he had developed as a way to process feelings and experiences that were too complex for simple discussion. Good book? Catherine asked, settling on the edge of his bed. It's about a boy whose father goes to war, George replied, showing her the cover. I thought it might help me understand how I'm supposed to feel about Dad being away. Catherine's heart ached at her son's earnest attempt to make sense of his emotions through literature. It was so characteristic of George to approach difficult situations intellectually, seeking understanding and context that could help him process his feelings. How do you feel about Dad being away? Catherine asked gently, giving him permission to express whatever emotions he was experiencing. George was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering his words carefully. I'm proud of him for doing important work, he finally said. But I'm also scared something might happen to him, and sad that he won't be here for things like my football matches and school concerts. Is it okay to feel both proud and sad at the same time? It's absolutely okay, Catherine assured him. In fact, it's perfectly normal and very mature. Love often means feeling many different emotions at once. You can be proud of Daddy's service and still miss him terribly. Those feelings don't cancel each other out. George nodded, visibly relieved to have his emotional complexity validated rather than simplified. Catherine made a mental note to check in with him regularly during William's deployment, recognizing that his tendency to internalize feelings could lead to unnecessary worry if left unaddressed. After the children were settled in their beds, Catherine found herself alone in the quiet palace for the first time since William's departure. The silence felt profound after the bustling activity of the day, highlighting the absence that would characterize her evenings for the months to come. She moved through the apartment, turning off lights and checking locks, completing the domestic tasks that had always been shared between them. In their bedroom, Catherine sat at the writing desk where she composed personal correspondence and worked on her speeches. Tonight, she had a different purpose, writing the first letter she would send to William. She had decided to write to him every few days, creating a record of their daily life that would help him feel connected to home, while also giving her a way to process her own feelings about his absence. My dearest William, she began, the words flowing easily onto the paper. You've been gone less than 12 hours, but already the palace feels different without you. Not empty, exactly, because the children and I fill it with our love and laughter, but incomplete in a way that only your presence can remedy. She wrote about the children's reactions to his departure, their brave faces during the goodbye ceremony, and their thoughtful questions throughout the day. She described the family journal project they had decided to start, and Charlotte's promise to help keep her from being too sad. She shared George's mature response to the complex emotions of the deployment, and Louis's innocent faith that Daddy would return safely from his important work. The hardest part of today wasn't the public goodbye, emotional as that was, Catherine continued. It was the bedtime routine, trying to fill the space where your voice should have been telling stories, and your hands should have been checking for monsters. The children adapted beautifully, as they always do, but I felt your absence acutely in those quiet moments when your presence has always been my anchor. As she wrote, Catherine found that the act of putting her thoughts and feelings into words was therapeutic, helping her process the complex emotions of the day while creating a tangible connection to William. She could picture him reading these letters in whatever temporary quarters he had been assigned, feeling connected to their daily life despite the distance that separated them. She sealed the letter in an envelope addressed to William's mission base, knowing that it might be weeks before it reached him, but finding comfort in the knowledge that her words would eventually bridge the gap between them. Tomorrow, she would begin establishing new routines and traditions that would sustain their family through the months of separation, but tonight she was content to honor the profound love that made his absence so difficult to bear. As Catherine prepared for bed, she realized that despite the sadness and uncertainty of the day, she felt a quiet confidence in her ability to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. The tearful goodbye that morning had been necessary and healing, allowing her to fully experience and express the depth of her feelings about William's departure. Now, having moved through that emotional release, she felt ready to embrace the strength and resilience that would carry her family through this temporary separation. Outside her bedroom window, London continued its nightly rhythm, millions of people going about their lives unaware of the private struggles and small victories happening within the palace walls. But Catherine felt connected to something larger than her own experience, part of a long tradition of military families who had learned to love across distance and maintain hope despite uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that love could indeed conquer all obstacles, even those measured in thousands of miles, and months of separation. 3 weeks had passed since William's departure, and Catherine had established new rhythms that helped her family navigate life without their anchor. The morning routine had evolved to include checking the world map in George's room, where they marked each day with a small sticker and calculated how much time remained until William's expected return. Charlotte had filled nearly half of a notebook with letters to her father, illustrated with careful drawings of their daily activities. Louis had taken to carrying William's photograph in his small backpack, pulling it out whenever he needed extra comfort during the day. The palace staff had observed Catherine's grace under pressure with growing admiration. She had maintained all of her official duties while somehow being even more present for her children than usual. The family journal project had evolved into an elaborate multimedia record, with pressed flowers from their garden walks, tickets for museum visits, and photographs documenting their adventures around London. Each evening, they would gather to add new entries, creating a treasure that would welcome William home with a complete picture of the life that had continued in his absence. On this particular morning, Catherine was working in her private office when her secretary knocked with unusual urgency. "Your Royal Highness, there's been a development regarding His Royal Highness's mission." Catherine's heart immediately began racing, every military spouse's worst fear flooding her mind. She had learned to live with the constant low-level anxiety that accompanied William's deployments, but sudden communications from the mission always triggered intense worry about his safety and well-being. "What kind of development?" Catherine asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the panic coursing through her veins. "A positive one, Your Royal Highness," her secretary quickly assured her. "The mission has been more successful than anticipated, and there's a possibility of early completion. The commander wanted to update you on the evolving timeline." Relief flooded through Catherine so powerfully that she had to sit down. The possibility of William returning ahead of schedule was almost too wonderful to contemplate, but she had learned not to invest too heavily in military timelines that could change without notice. Still, the news provided hope that their separation might be shorter than originally anticipated. Later that afternoon, as Catherine was helping Louis with a puzzle in the nursery, the secure phone in William's study rang. Only a handful of people had access to that particular line, and calls usually meant either crisis or celebration. Catherine hurried to answer, her heart pounding with anticipation and concern. "Catherine, Is that my beautiful wife?" William's voice, clear and strong despite the thousands of miles between them, was the most wonderful sound Catherine had heard in weeks. She sank into his desk chair, clutching the phone as if it were a lifeline connecting her to the person she missed most in the world. "William, oh my goodness, it's so good to hear your voice. Are you safe? Are you well? We've been counting the days, and missing you terribly." "I'm safe and well, and missing you more than I can possibly express," William replied, his voice warm with love and longing. "I have about 10 minutes before I need to return to briefings, but I had to call and tell you the news myself. There's a strong possibility that I'll be home earlier than we originally planned." Catherine felt tears of joy gathering in her eyes as the implications of his words sank in. "How much earlier?" "Potentially several weeks, though I don't want to promise anything definitive until we receive final confirmation. The humanitarian situation has stabilized much more quickly than anticipated, and the local infrastructure is strong enough to continue the work without our direct involvement." "The children will be over the moon," Catherine said, thinking immediately of how this news would affect George, Charlotte, and Louis. "They've been so brave and strong, but I know they've been counting every single day until your expected return." "How are they really doing?" William asked, his concern evident even through the distant connection. "I know you've been protecting me from the harder moments, but I need to know how they're truly handling the separation." Catherine considered her response carefully. She had indeed been selective in her communications, choosing to focus on positive developments and achievements rather than dwelling on the difficult days when the children struggled with missing their father. But William deserved honest information about his family's well-being. "They've had their challenging moments," she admitted. "Louis had a few nights where he couldn't sleep without your photograph, and Charlotte cried after her piano recital because she wanted you there to hear her performance. George has been the most stoic, but I can see him carrying extra responsibility, trying to be the man of the house in ways that are both touching and concerning for a 10-year-old. "And what about you?" William asked gently. "How are you really doing, Kate?" The question, asked with such tenderness and concern, nearly undid Catherine's composure. She had been so focused on maintaining strength for the children and fulfilling her public duties that she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge her own struggles with the separation. "Some days are harder than others," she confessed. "I miss our conversations at the end of the day, when we would process everything that happened and plan for tomorrow. I miss having someone who understands the unique pressures of our life, someone I can be completely honest with about my fears and doubts. But I've also discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed." "That doesn't surprise me at all," William said warmly. "You've always been the strongest person I know, even when you don't see it yourself. I'm so proud of how you're holding our family together." The sound of voices in the background indicated that William's private time was coming to an end. Catherine could hear the return of military efficiency in his tone as he prepared to transition back to his professional responsibilities. "I have to go," William said reluctantly. "But I'll call again as soon as I can, and I'll send word the moment we have confirmation about the early return timeline. Give the children my love, and tell them that every day here reinforces how lucky I am to have them waiting for me at home." "I love you," Catherine said, pouring all her emotion into those 3 simple words. "I love you too, more than all the stars in the sky," William replied, using the phrase he had shared with the children on the morning of his departure. After the call ended, Catherine sat in William's study for several long minutes, absorbing the joy and relief of hearing his voice combined with the renewed hope of his early return. The familiar surroundings, filled with his books and personal effects, seemed to hold traces of his presence more strongly after their conversation. When she finally emerged to find the children, they immediately sensed something significant had happened. Catherine had learned that children were remarkably perceptive about adult emotions, especially when those emotions involved their own security and happiness. "Was that Daddy on the phone?" Charlotte asked hopefully, reading Catherine's expression with uncanny accuracy. "It was," Catherine confirmed, unable to suppress her smile. "And he had some very exciting news to share with all of us." She gathered all 3 children in the family room and shared William's update about the mission's progress and the possibility of early return. The children's reactions ranged from Louis's immediate joyful dancing to George's cautious questions about the reliability of military timelines to Charlotte's practical concerns about whether they would have enough entries in the family journal to properly welcome him home. "We need to finish the special surprise we've been working on," George said, referring to a collaborative art project they had been creating for William's return. "If he might come home early, we need to speed up our timeline. And I need to practice my new piano pieces," Charlotte added. "I want to be ready to perform the concert we planned for his homecoming." Louis, ever practical despite his young age, had a different priority. "Should we make his favorite cookies now, or wait until we know exactly when he's coming home?" Catherine laughed at the children's immediate shift into planning mode, their resilience and adaptability once again amazing her. They had learned to live with uncertainty while maintaining hope, a valuable life skill that would serve them well in their unique positions as members of the royal family. Over the following days, the palace buzzed with renewed energy as they prepared for the possibility of William's early return. Catherine found herself checking her secure phone constantly, hoping for updates on the mission's timeline while trying to manage her own excitement and the children's eager anticipation. The family journal had grown into an impressive documentation of their time apart. Catherine flipped through its pages during quiet moments, marveling at the record they had created. There were George's thoughtful entries about his school projects and growing understanding of his future responsibilities. Charlotte's artistic contributions included detailed drawings of their adventures and pressed flowers from special walks. Louis's contributions were simpler, but no less heartfelt, stick figure families and rainbow drawings that expressed his pure love and hope. Catherine's own entries had evolved from the sad, lonely passages of the early days to increasingly confident and hopeful reflections on their family's strength and resilience. She had documented not just their activities, but also their emotional journey through the separation, creating an honest record of how love could sustain a family across any distance. 2 weeks after William's surprise phone call, the official confirmation finally arrived. His mission was concluding successfully, and he would be returning home 6 weeks ahead of schedule. The news came through formal channels first, followed by a personal call from William himself, his joy and relief evident even across the secure connection. "I'm coming home, Kate," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "In 5 days, I'll be back with my family where I belong." The children's reactions to the confirmed news were explosive in their joy. Louis literally jumped up and down for several minutes. Charlotte immediately began planning an elaborate welcome home celebration, and George's careful composure finally cracked as he grinned more broadly than Catherine had seen since his father's departure. The final days of preparation passed in a blur of activity. The palace staff coordinated William's return logistics while Catherine and the children put finishing touches on their various surprise projects. The family journal was bound in a special leather cover with William's initials embossed in gold. The collaborative artwork was framed and wrapped with care. Charlotte's piano performance was rehearsed to perfection, and Louis practiced reading aloud his favorite letters to Daddy. On the morning of William's return, Catherine woke before dawn with excitement and nervous energy that reminded her of their wedding day. She had missed William terribly during his deployment, but she had also grown as a person, discovering new depths of strength and capability that she hadn't known she possessed. She felt proud of how she had guided their family through the separation, maintaining stability and love while allowing each family member to process their feelings honestly. As she prepared for the day, Catherine reflected on the journey they had all completed. The tearful goodbye that had touched the nation had been just the beginning of their story. The real test had come in the months that followed, as they learned to maintain their connection across distance and uncertainty. They had not just survived William's deployment, they had thrived, growing stronger individually and as a family. The reunion would be joyful and emotional, captured by cameras and shared with a nation that had followed their story from the beginning. But Catherine knew that the real victory lay not in the public celebration, but in the private knowledge that their love had proven stronger than distance, their family bonds more resilient than any temporary separation. As she looked out the window at the London morning, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had completed together. The goodbye had been necessary and meaningful, but the reunion would be even sweeter for having been earned through months of patience, faith, and unwavering love. Soon, their family would be complete again, stronger for having weathered this test, and more aware than ever of the precious gift they had in each other.